this video, we're going to add some doors and windows to our layout here. So I'm continuing in the 2-bedroom apartment unit, and I will start with doors. So on the architecture tab, I'm going to click the doors tool, or you can type DR, the keyboard shortcut. Now, the default door in the Imperial file is a door passage single flush door that is 36 inches wide by 84 inches tall. If you're working in the metric file, then it will be door passage single flush, and it will be 900 millimeters wide by 2100 millimeters tall. So in both cases, we're going to accept that default, and let's go ahead and place one of those doors. Now, on the status bar at the bottom of the screen, it says click on a wall to place a door. Doors and windows are wall-hosted elements. So before you can place them, you must designate which wall you want them hosted to. So notice that the door doesn't appear until I start to move my cursor over some eligible wall. Now, I could place it on any wall that I like. Revit doesn't much care, but it does need to be on a wall. Now, where we want to place this door is in the entrance to the condo here. So I'm going to highlight this little diagonal wall off to the right to begin placing that door. Now, notice that if you move the mouse very subtly, you can get it to flip either into or out of the space. So I want to make sure it's flipping into the space, and then I will click to place it. That will display a few temporary dimensions. So notice that temporary dimensions work on any object, not just walls, and we can manipulate them the same way we were able to manipulate things when we were working with them with walls. So what I want to do here is on the hinge side of this door, I want to snug it into that corner a little bit closer. So I'm going to use 4 inches in the Imperial file, or 100 millimeters if you're working in metric. So I want to make several other single swing doors, but I want to use a slightly smaller size. So I'm going to come over here to the type selector and notice that this particular door family has several sizes. So I'm going to drop down to one with smaller. So 30 by 84 if you're working in Imperial, or 750 by 2100 if you're working in metric. So I want to place one here in this utility room. I want to place one up here in this bathroom. And again, you can modify the jam there. So I'll go to 4 inches. I'm going to place one here in this bedroom. And again, modify that to 4 inches or 100 millimeters. I will place one here in this bathroom, but this one I'm going to leave centered. However, notice that it's swinging up. Well, maybe I want it to swing down. So if we look down at the status bar at the bottom of the screen, in addition to saying click on a wall to place the door, it also says use the space bar to flip left or right. So let's do that. Let's just tap the space bar and notice that each time you do, it will change the swing direction. When it's pointing down, I will click to place it in that space. Let's do one here in this walk-in closet, tapping the space bar to orient it the way I want. And then in this bedroom, tapping the space bar to orient the way that I want. And then I'll edit this value to 4 inches or 100 millimeters. So those are all the single flush swinging doors that I want. Now I want to add a double door down here in this patio pointing out. So coming out of the living room there's going to be a patio in the lower portion of the plan. Now the only double door that I currently have loaded is this double flush door here. So for now, I'm going to choose that. And in the Imperial file, I'll choose the 72 by 84 inch size. If you're working in metric, use the 1800 by 2100 millimeter size. And just place it centered in this space and pointing out. Now, we'll think of that as a placeholder door, and what we'll do is we'll come back and swap that out with a more appropriate glass door later. But for now, that at least gets the plan correct. So we've got something there representing our intent. So that is all the doors that we can place currently based on what is loaded in this file from the original template. So if you want to load any additional doors, like the bifold doors for the closets or a sliding door for this closet down here, we're going to need to load those families in. So let's talk about how to do that now. So I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel the command temporarily. And let's make one adjustment to the doors that we've already placed. If you zoom in here, you'll notice that several of them are shifted with respect to their walls. So I'm going to right-click one of these doors, go to select all instances visible in the view. That selects all of them. And what controls that is this masonry frame feature right here. Simply uncheck that and all the doors will shift and become centered in their walls instead. And I think that looks a lot better. Okay, so now let's move on to loading another door family. Doors and windows are loadable families, and that means that we can load in other families when we need to. So in this case, we need a bifold door for some of our closets and a sliding door for the closet down here in the lower portion of the plan. To get those doors, we're going to load those families in. So you can do that on the Insert tab in one of two ways. If you've installed the content library locally on your hard drive, you can use the Load Family button. If you haven't installed it locally, then you can still access the library from the cloud using the Load Autodesk Family tool here. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click Load Autodesk Family, and that's going to display this interface. Now, using the globe here, you need to determine which library you want to load from. So I'm working in the United States Imperial, but if you're working in metric, you're going to want to choose the metric library instead. Both of them are organized in the same folder structure, so you should be seeing similar things when you do. So choose the library that's appropriate, and then over here, you should see a doors folder. So I'm going to click that. And you can see all the doors that are available here. Now, I could scroll through the list looking for the one that I want, but it might be a little easier to find if I switch to the residential folder next. That's going to simplify the list to just those doors that are residential in nature. And the one that I want is this one right here. It's an interior double sliding door. So I'm going to select that and click load. And next, it will display this specify types window. So this window is used when there are lots of types to choose from, and it allows you to select just one or more of the types that you want to load. And in this case, we really only need one size, and it's this one right here. If you're working in Imperial, it's 72 by 84. If you're working in metric, go with the 1800 by 2100. So select the type that you want, click OK. That's going to load that family into the project. And now you can go back to architecture and click door or type DR, and it should be already loaded on your properties here. And you can simply place that door in the appropriate space, this closet here in the bottom of the plan. And that's really all there is to loading an external family. So let's repeat that process again, going back to Insert, back to Load Autodesk Family. And the bifold door is unfortunately not in either of the two libraries I pointed out to you, the US Imperial or the US Metric. So we can find it actually in the Australian library. So I'm going to go to the globe here, choose Australia as the region, go to doors, and then you can see this bifold two-panel door right here. So I'm going to load that in. This one does not have a type catalog, so it doesn't prompt me to load types, which means that when we go to the doors command, notice that all of the types within that family loaded. In this case, there are 5 sizes. So we can choose any one of those sizes. So start with the largest size and place that one in this closet and this closet. Then we're going to zoom in here in the upper toilet room and open up the selector here and choose the smallest size, and we're going to place that one here. Now, you want to kind of place it carefully so that it goes in the center of that space, and it might do something like that. And if it does, you can just simply enter a new dimension to kind of shift it. So in the Imperial file, I went with 1 inch. In the metric file, that would be about 25 millimeters. Now I'm going to cancel out of the command, select the door, and there are grip controls here and here. So you can flip it left or right. You can flip it in or out of the space. So feel free to adjust and fine tune it later. In fact, you can use the space bar and toggle through all of those options as well. So now that we've placed all the doors, placing windows is a breeze because it's exactly the same process. So to finish this up, I'm going to work with windows that are already loaded in this file, but you are welcome to go to Load Autodesk Family and choose other windows if you desire. But I'm going to click the window tool, open up the type selector, and I'll work with this double casement window here. I'm going to take the largest size and place a couple of those in the bottom of the plan here in each of these spaces. And then I will take the next smallest size above that and place one of those here in the upper bedroom like so. So feel free to continue in this file and load any additional families that you'd like to experiment with and try placing them. In this video, we're going to place some components in this 2-bedroom apartment unit. Now, just what exactly are components? Well, components can be anything really. They are a number of different categories that are accessed through the component tool. So when you click the door tool or the window tool, you only get access to doors and windows respectively. But when you click the component tool, you're going to see that if you open up the type selector list, you're going to have items of a variety of categories available to you. So there are light fixtures in here, there are appliances, furniture, casework. There's a variety of different categories available. So components is really just a catch-all term for any number of elements that you can place in your model. So I'm going to start with this dishwasher family right here. There's only one size, so I'm going to choose that. And I'll start off outside the model over here. And what I want to show you is that it attaches it to the cursor, and you can simply place it wherever you want. And you can also change its orientation by tapping the spacebar. So as you tap the spacebar, it'll rotate in 90-degree increments. If your mouse happens to be highlighting something at a different orientation, like this angled wall, and you tap the spacebar, then the 90-degree increments will relate to that angled orientation. If you want to reset that, just move into empty space, tap it one more time, and it will go back to the default orientations. This even works on curved elements. So if I come over here and highlight this curved door swing and tap the space bar, notice that it's now matching that curvature that it inherited from the door swing. Pretty cool. I'm going to come out here in empty space and just tap the space bar again to reset the orientation. Now I'm going to change the orientation a few more times to flip it around this way. And then I'll come into this lower right-hand corner of the plan here, which is the kitchen, and highlight the bottom wall and click to place that dishwasher. I'm going to click the Modify tool to cancel. And notice that there's a little built-in offset in that family to allow some clearance behind the unit, which is kind of a nice feature. Okay, so that's a really simple example of placing a component. Let's go right back to the component tool and place something else. So I'm going to scroll up a little bit on the list here, and there are a couple countertops. So it doesn't really matter which one you choose. I'm going to choose the one with a sinkhole like this. Tap the space bar a few times to spin it around, and then I'm going to place it on this exterior wall here next to the dishwasher. I'll click the Modify tool to cancel, come back and select the countertop, maybe zoom in a touch so we can see this a little better. Notice that it's got a variety of grip controls on the element. You can easily use these to resize this counter and make it stretch to the width of the room. Depending on the family that you bring in, each one has its own little special features and behaviors. So in that case, that one has an adjustable length. What else can we bring in? Let's go back to component one more time. And there's one more family that's already here in this file that I want to bring in, and that is a toilet fixture. So I'm going to open up the type selector once again. And instead of scrolling through the list and trying to find the toilet fixture, instead what I want to do is take advantage of the search at the top there. So you can notice that the search is active and you can type in anything you want. So toilet seems like a good search term. Let's try that. But unfortunately, that comes up with no matches. Now, what this does expose is that search is only as good as knowing what to search for. So you do kind of want to be familiar with the naming conventions in the file you're working in so that you can search for the appropriate thing. And it turns out in this case that the toilets are actually called water closets. So if you type in the word water, then you're going to see the various toilets that are available. Now there's 3 of them. These 2 are a little bit more commercial. So let's stick with this first one here, which is more appropriate for a residential setting. I'm just going to choose the first item from that list, and you'll see that toilet fixture come in. Now, the orientation is already correct for this bathroom, so I'll place one here. And then in this other bathroom, I'll tap the space bar a few times, spin it around, and place it there. I'll click the Modify tool to cancel out. There may be other items in the component tool already that you can place, but let's move on to the next step, which is what to do when something that you want isn't already loaded in the file. So that's going to happen pretty frequently, and there's a variety of ways that you can access outside content and bring it into your project. So we're going to go to the Insert tab for this, and we're going to start with this Load Family tool right here. So when you click Load Family, it's going to browse out to your hard drive, and there's a pretty good chance you're going to see a screen that looks kind of like the one that I see here. And there's a single item in here, and if you hover over it, it says, if you're looking for Autodesk content, go to autodesk.com and download the Revit content, or you can use the Load Autodesk Family tool. So we're going to do both of those things, but I've already gone to autodesk.com and installed the library. So I've already done that first step. So I want to show you what that looks like should you decide to do that. If you haven't done that and you want to do that, then you will want to pause this video. You'll need to go download and install. It's going to take some time because it's a big download, but then you can come back and your screen should match mine more closely, or you can just watch what it looks like on my screen just to get an idea. It's up to you. So I'm going to click this little up button here, and that's going to take me to that library that I've downloaded and installed. And you can see it's organized into these folders, and these folders are just based on the different categories of the content items. So let's say that I wanted to place a furnace over here in this utility room. So I'm going to go to this mechanical folder, then architectural, then airside components, then finally furnaces, and there's a single furnace family right there. I'm going to open that up, go back to architecture, click my component tool. When you load a family, it'll put it right on your cursor, so you shouldn't have to hunt for it, it should already be there, and I'll simply place it where I want it to go. Click the Modify tool to cancel, and it's really just that simple to access an item from the installed library and place it in your model. If you haven't installed the library and you don't want to do the download and install, I've provided copies of each of the families that I'm talking about here in this video with the exercise files. They're in a folder called OTB, so you can load them from that location, and that would kind of simulate the same thing. What about the other option that it said there? It said we could use Load Autodesk Family. So I'm going to go to Insert, and we've actually looked at this tool in an earlier video, but let's look at it again. It's called Load Autodesk Family, and you can see the little cloud icon here. This is the exact same library that I just accessed, only stored in the cloud, which means you don't have to download and install it first, which is kind of a nice thing. Now, the first thing you always want to check is your locale settings. So I'm using English language and United States Imperial Library, but there are other libraries available. In fact, if you think back to the Doors and Windows video, we loaded a family from the Australia Library. So it's perfectly fine to use other libraries if you wish, but I'm going to stick with United States Imperial for this example and just close out of there. The United States Imperial Library has 3,800 families in it, so there's an awful lot to choose from, and I certainly don't want to just sit here and scroll through the list. That'd take way too much time. There are folders we can browse over here, and if you look at them, they actually kind of match the folders that I just showed you in the installed library. In fact, here's mechanical, and when I click that, there's architectural, airside, and furnaces. And there's that same furnace family right there. So it's organized in exactly the same way. And if you're familiar with the library structure, you can just simply browse to it like I've done there. Alternatively, you can search for things. So notice that there's a search up here. This is something you can't do with the locally installed library. So this is one of the things I really like about Load Autodesk Family. So let's say I wanted to put a water heater in that utility room along with the furnace. All I need to do is type in that keyword, press enter, and it will go from 3,800 results down to 3. I can choose the one that I want, click load, and then it's going to load that item in. I can go back to architecture and component. It puts it on my cursor, and then I can place it where I want it to go. Now, another really nice feature of that technique is if I go back to Load Autodesk Family, let's clear the search right here. And this time I'm going to browse by category. So I want to bring in multiple items. So instead of searching for each one, what I'm going to do is limit the categories here to specialty equipment only. So I'm going to scroll down and locate specialty equipment. And that's because most appliances are part of the specialty equipment category. Now you can further specialize over here in the browse categories because this is a lot of industrial stuff here and I don't really want that. I want to stick with domestic maybe only, and then maybe even stick with just high or mid-range. So when I get down to the subcategory that I'm interested in, now I've only got 15 results. It's much easier to browse. So you could look through here and you could say, well, I want a gas range and a refrigerator and maybe a microwave oven. And the cool thing about doing it this way is you can select multiple items and download and install them at the same time. So you don't have to do these one at a time. And so that's another really nice feature of this cloud library. And then again, once you've done that, it's just a matter of going back to the component tool and finding the item and placing it where you want it to go. Let's reconsider this countertop that I have down here. When I placed it, it was fine, but it's a straight countertop, and I don't think that's really the right choice for this particular kitchen. So I'm going to go back to load Autodesk Family one more time. I'm going to clear the search here by going to all results and any here at the top. So that gets me back to 3,800 items. And I'm going to type in counter at the top here and press enter. So now you can see there are quite a few items, but that's what I'm looking for right there is an L-shaped counter. I'm going to load that in. And now I can simply select this family, open up the type selector and change it to the L-shaped one, and you can see that it will swap it right in place there. Then I can select it. It's got similar little grip controls that the other one did, and I could start to stretch that. And there's even little controls to control where the sink is. Now, I prefer to do that numerically here on the properties palette. So if you type in a different number, it will shift that sink over. So I'll let you experiment with that to fine tune the position of that sink and the length of each leg of the L-shaped counter. But that's an example of where you could start with a placeholder and then just come back and swap it in with another family when you find a more appropriate choice. Let's say that you've explored the libraries and you're not finding what you're looking for. So what other options do you have? Well, of course, you can go out and search for something online. Now, there's lots of libraries online. Some are good, some are not so good. Some cost money, some are free. So you'll definitely want to do your due diligence to make sure that you're finding good quality content. But when you do, and once you've downloaded it to your local system, then it's just a matter of loading it like any other family. So to simulate that, I've placed a family in the exercise files folder, and all you need to do is go to load family. I'm going to go to desktop, exercise files, chapter 4, and I've got this bathtub family right here. We're going to load that in, go to the component tool. It comes in kind of small. So I'm going to change the size. You will notice that the sizes are in imperial units, and that's pretty typical of something you might download off the internet. You don't get to decide what units it's in. The person who created the family did. So if you're working in imperial, it might be a metric, and vice versa. If you're working in metric, it might be imperial. But don't worry, it's the size it is, right? So I'm going to choose the 60 by 30 size, which is the appropriate size for this plan. Tap the space bar a few times to flip it around and place it in a couple locations in the model, like so. Feel free to continue in this file, downloading and placing additional components. And when you're done, it should look something like this. When two walls touch one another, they usually join automatically, and typically the joint condition that we get automatically is suitable in most cases. However, it's not always the case, and there are some times when we get an unacceptable wall join and we want to adjust it. In cases like that, we have the wall joins tool that we can use to help us adjust the default behavior. So to demonstrate the wall joins tool, I'm going to zoom in over here on the right-hand side of the plan, and I've got a few conditions where we can talk about this. So we're going to start with these walls here that enter into the suite. So these are masonry walls here, and they're butting into these stud walls here. And currently it's not displaying correctly. I would want the masonry wall to continue through and interrupt the stud wall. So we're going to use the wall joins tool to help us do that. Now the interface of this tool is a little tricky at first. So let's go ahead and click the tool and let me show you what I mean. When you first click it, it's not exactly obvious what you're supposed to do. Well, as you move your mouse nearby any intersection, it will highlight the intersection with this little box, and you can go to any intersection you like. So we want to highlight the first intersection that we want to work on, this one right here, and then click. When you click, that will activate a number of choices on the options bar. And then that's how you're going to cycle through the available options. So there's a next and previous button here and here, and you've got three different choices, but miter and square off, that you can use. So for this example, we're going to just focus on butt and miter. We'll talk about square off in just a few moments. But if I click miter, you can see what it's going to do. That's not really appropriate in this case. So I think the butt joint is definitely the appropriate way to go, but we're just getting the wrong butt joint. Well, all we need to do is click either next or previous, and it will cycle to another option. And in this case, that looks a lot better. So that's the one that I'm going to keep. Now, you would expect there to be an apply button or something like that, but we're done already. So if you wanted to get out of this command, you would just simply click your modify tool and there's nothing more to do. But you can also stay in the command and just simply shift focus from this intersection over to this intersection, and you can repeat the process. It's a butt joint. We click next, and there we go. So you can keep moving around the plan by choosing as many intersections as need attention. And then when you're done, that's when you click the modify tool to cancel out. Now, we had butt and miter, but there was also that square off option. So when would you use that? So let's do the wall joints tool one more time. And square off would come into place in cases like this, where you have an acute angle. So what I want to do is click the square off option, and already you can see that it has blunted that corner and applied the condition. Now, that's one possible option. If we click next, here's another possible option. Now, I think I like that one a little bit better, so that's the one I'm going to go with. And then I'm going to shift down to this intersection, square off. I can either do that or that. I think I like this one better, so that's the one I'm going to go with. And then I'll click my modify tool to finish. So you can see where we can use the edit wall joints tool to fine tune the wall joints that we're getting by default. Now, there's one other option that we can do with wall joints that I don't really have a great example for here in this particular floor plan. I'm going to show it to you, but then I'll give you an illustration of a better example when I'm done. So let's say I take this wall right here, and you'll notice that there's these little dots at either end. Now, you can use those dots to actually adjust the length of the wall, right? So if I wanted to change the length of the wall, I can just simply drag that little dot. I'm going to undo that. Well, the other thing you can do with that little dot is you can right-click it and choose Disallow Join. Now, when you do that, if you pull this thing away or bring it back again, it will now completely ignore that other wall as if it wasn't even there. So Disallow Join is just that. It's no longer applying the join condition. Now, why would you do that? Well, maybe you want a butt condition, something like that. So maybe this is a demising wall and you don't want this one to clean up with it. So you could apply that condition to simulate that. Now, if you ever change your mind and you want to reverse it, there's a allow join icon that will appear next to that joint indicating that it's currently not allowed, and that will simply reverse the effect. So when would you use something like that? So here's a situation where it would be much more common. So here's a commercial floor plan with a curtain wall, and the default wall joins will typically try to join to where this red line is that I've drawn on top here, which means that it would look something like what you see on the left-hand side. But if you use disallow join, you can manually modify it so that the wall butts into the mullion instead of the wall itself and get the proper condition. So that's a more common example of when you would use that disallow join. So I'm going to zoom in over here on the right-hand side of this plan, and I'm going to focus on this break room first. And let's say that it's important to me to establish the distance of this door off of this wall and then to constrain that, to lock that in, to prevent that from changing. So let me show you how we would do that. I'm going to come up here to the quick access toolbar and click the aligned dimension tool, or DI. And I'm going to start in the inside face of this wall for the first witness line. And the second witness line, I want to be on the door itself. So when you're moving over here, you want to try and locate the edge of the door. You can see it right there. So make sure it says doors and not wall. Click, and then I'll just click an empty white space to place that dimension. I'm going to click the modify tool to cancel out. And now I want to show you something that's interesting. Even though this is a permanent dimension, if you select the item that's being dimensioned, the door in this case, notice that in addition to getting the standard temporary dimensions here, it also activates the permanent dimension. So I actually use this technique quite a lot. So I actually prefer to draw my own dimensions and then use those as temporaries. And so if I click right here, I can activate that number. And let's say I wanted this distance to be 3 in imperial or 900 millimeters in metric. So I'm going to put that in, enter it, you'll see the door move to that position. But now it's important in my design that that door doesn't change, doesn't deviate from that location. So I'm going to come back and select the dimension, and there's a padlock right here. You just simply lock it. So what does that do? Well, now if you were to take this wall and you were to move it, and I'm just going to drag it a little bit, notice that the door moves with it. Okay, so you could move it left or right, but the door is going to move along with the wall. Now, in this case, that relationship is one-sided, meaning that if I tried to move the door, it won't let me. So the wall is driving the position of the door, but the door can't move unless the wall does, right? So that's what I mean by one-sided. So it really just depends on the two objects that you're constraining, whether or not it will generate that kind of relationship. Let's do another example. Here in Office 108, you can see I've got this window here, but the window is currently off center. And maybe I want to center it in the room. Okay, so a really easy way to do that is with dimensions. So I'm going to go to Align Dimension yet again, or DI, and I'm going to start with 2 witness lines on the inside faces of the walls in the office, and then the 3rd witness line is going to be the center of the window. So notice if you move your mouse near the center, you can highlight it. I'll click that as a witness line, click up here in empty white space to place the dimension, and you're looking for this EQ toggle next. It might be off screen, so pan slightly if you need to, or zoom, but you just simply want to click that little EQ, and when you do, notice that the window will snap into position and it's now exactly centered between those 2 walls. That is not a one-time modification, a one-time move. That is now a constraint. So I can demonstrate that by selecting one of the 2 walls and dragging it. And notice that when I do, the window also moves in order to maintain that centered relationship. So that's another example of a constraint that we can apply. Now, if I zoom out slightly here and pan, you'll see that there's a window across the way. And maybe I want that window to be lined up with the one that I just worked on. Okay, so there's a great tool to help me do that. It's on the Modify tab and it's called Align. Okay, keyboard shortcut is AL. And with the Align tool, you select one object that you want to use as a reference and another object that you want to move into alignment, right? So I'm going to start with the center line of that same window that we started with a minute ago. And that's going to establish the alignment reference. And then I want to come down here and pick the center line of the second window. And notice that it will move over and snap into alignment with the first one. So now those 2 windows are perfectly lined up. If I want to maintain that relationship, lock it in as a constraint, it gives me that option right here. And I can simply toggle that padlock. And now that relationship is established. Let's click the Modify tool to cancel. And actually what I've got now is a nested relationship, because this office up here with its 2 walls is still controlling the location of this window, which in turn is going to control the location of this window. Let me demonstrate. Let's take this wall here and move it back to its original position. And notice that not only does the window at the top move to stay centered in the room, but it also takes the one down below along for the ride. Okay, so pretty powerful stuff, right? So let's look at another example. For this one, we're going to move over to this side of the plan, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit so that you can see the 4 offices, the left side of the plan. Now notice currently the 4 offices are all random size, and each of their doors is in random locations. That's what I want to address now. So I'm going to start with this door down here at the bottom, and there's a dimension already there, and it's currently set to 6 inches in the imperial file or 150 millimeters in the metric file. I'm going to select that dimension. And what we did over here was we locked it. And you could do that here as well. But in order to get each of these at the same distance, you would have to then move those doors, lock them, move the door, lock them. Let me show you an alternative way to approach this. With that dimension selected, we can come up here to the ribbon, and there's a label option here. You can open up this list and choose a parameter to label that dimension with. Now, you'll notice I don't have any parameters at the moment. The only choice is none. Well, right next to the dropdown is a Create Parameter icon. I can click that. That displays the Global Parameter Properties dialog. Simply type in a name that you want this parameter to have. I'm going to call it Typical Door Jamb and click OK. You can tell when a dimension is labeled with a global parameter because this little pencil icon will appear next to it, indicating that there's a global parameter driving that dimension. And you'll also see it right here when it's selected. So now here's where it gets really interesting. I'm going to select this dimension, hold the control key down, pick this one and this one. If you look at the properties palette, it should say dimensions 3. So now with those 3 dimensions selected, I'm going to open up the label dropdown and notice that there is a choice now because we've created a global parameter a moment ago. Typical door jamb. Let's select that and notice what happens to the 3 doors. They all snap into position 6 inches away from their respective walls, and they're all displaying the little pencil icon now, indicating that they're being driven by a global parameter. If you click the little pencil, that displays the global parameters dialog and you can edit the value. So consider what we have over here with the locked dimension. If you changed your design and you didn't want it to be 3 feet anymore, you wanted it to be 2 feet, what would you have to do? Well, you have to select the dimension, unlock it, move the door, then relock the dimension. With the global parameter, you simply edit the value. I'm going to put in 2 feet in imperial, or you can put in 600 millimeters in metric. Click apply, and notice that all the doors will respond. So the global parameter in a lot of ways is a much more flexible way to do this because it allows you to lock in your intent, but it also gives you the flexibility to make changes to it later, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. So let's do one more example. I'm going to add another align dimension or DI. And I want to equalize the size of all those offices over there. Now, the best way to do that is to control where I place my witness line. So instead of wall faces, I think I'm going to get much better results using the core. And specifically, I'm going to use the center of core. Okay, so I'm going to choose center of core here. And this wall down here, the center of core is where the studs are. This one, this one, this one. So all the studs are the same in those 4 walls because they're right in the center. But notice that the studs on the exterior wall are offset, right? So this is how I'm going to ensure that all of those offices are equally spaced. I'll come outside the plan, click to place the dimension, toggle the equality, and just like that, you'll see that we now have all 4 of those offices equally spaced. And because the global parameter was still applied, all of the doors moved along with it. So now, if you wanted to, you could go back and modify the global parameter and change the value, and all of those doors will adjust with respect to their now equally sized offices. So that's another nested relationship that we've kind of built in there. So the last thing I want to talk about in this video is how you identify where constraints are and how you modify them once they're there. So modifying them is easy if the dimension already exists. So the dimension is there, for example, in Office 108, and let's say I decided I didn't want that dimension to be there anymore, you can simply delete it. Now, here's where it gets interesting, though, because if you delete the dimension, you actually get a choice. You could simply delete the dimension by clicking OK and keep the constraint, or you could also unconstrain that relationship. Okay, so it's giving you the option to do one or the other. I'm going to click OK here. And what that does is that means that if I come back later and I move this wall, notice that it's still keeping that window in the center, even though the dimension is no longer there, right? So let's say that you encountered something like that and you found that confusing. So how would you be able to tell where the constraints in a model are? Well, there's a display mode that allows us to turn them on. And it's down here on the view control bar, and it's simply called reveal constraints. So we're going to click that icon right there. And that puts this red border around the screen. And now it's very obvious where all the constraints are because they show up in this bright red color. Furthermore, when you select one of those items, it will highlight the objects that are part of that constraint. So it becomes even easier for you to identify where these relationships are and which objects they apply to, right? Now, the other thing you'll notice is there's some constraints that were in this model that weren't visible. They were here already when we started. So this is another nice way to use this tool, is to identify ones that you're not seeing that don't necessarily have dimensions associated with them. Now, earlier we deleted that dimension and we decided to keep the constraint. Let's say you changed your mind now. It's as simple as selecting the red dimension here and delete. And now this wall no longer drives the position of that window. Now I did leave the alignment constraint, which means that if I move one of these windows, it will still move the other. So it's up to you which constraints you want to keep and which ones you want to remove. But reveal constraints is a great way for you to identify where they are and make those modifications.